Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the Association for Leadership Science and Nursing webinar. ASLN is an international association dedicated to uniting academic and practice leaders to shape leadership science and education and nursing. If you'd like more information, please visit our website. We have a ton of information as well as resources to help you in your career. Next slide. And today's webinar, we have a webinar in our series on authentic leadership.
I tried to reach you regarding your inquiry for property in Newport, Richie, Florida. You looking for property? That's a text.
Patricia, could you silence yourself, please?
Really?
Thank you. Okay, our presenters today are Dr. Roseanne Rasso. Dr. Rasso is currently the Chief Nursing Officer for the magnet-designated New York Presbyterian's Weill Cornell campus, the #1 hospital in New York metropolitan area and #4 in the country. Previously, she was a Chief Integration Officer for NYU Langone Brooklyn, and prior to that, the Nursing Executive of Lenox Hill Hospital. Her contributions to nursing are numerous. She is the editor-in-chief of the Nursing Management, the Journal of Excellence in Nursing Leadership, a trusted resource for frontline leaders with global circulation of 58,000. In addition to authoring rousing monthly editorials and over 100 publications, she's a member of the planning panel for the journal's national conference. She was inducted into the American Academy of Nursing in November of 2018. Additionally, we have Dr. Joyce J. Fitzpatrick. Dr. Fitzpatrick is the director of Marion K. Shaughnessy Nursing Leadership Academy and Elizabeth Brooks Ford Professor of Nursing, Francis Payne Bolton School of Nursing, Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio, where she was dean from 1982 through 1997. Dr. Fitzpatrick is widely published in nursing and healthcare literature with over 400 publications, including more than 80 books. She served as the co-editor for the Annual Review of Nursing Research Series, volumes 1 through 26. She's the editor of Classic Encyclopedia of Nursing Research, now in its 4th edition, and co-editor of the Encyclopedia of Nursing Education. Currently, she edits the Journal of Applied Nursing Research and Archives in Psychiatric Nursing. In 2021, with Dr. Mary Beth Modick, she published a children's book titled Luminaries of the Past, Stories of 50 Extraordinary Nurses. And finally, we have Dr. K. David Bailey. Dr. Bailey serves as the Chief Nursing Officer for UCLA Health Santa Monica Medical Center, which is one of the 2 acute care hospitals within the UCLA Health System. The Santa Monica Medical Campus recently received its 2nd magnet designation. David serves as a mentor for numerous leaders and staff nurses across the organization and serves as an executive sponsor for several of the local and system level professional governance structures. In addition, Dr. Bailey has been actively engaged in ALSN since 2013 and is currently the president of ALSN. He has served as an invited speaker, panelist, and moderator for various audiences and has published several articles in various professional journal forums. His doctoral work focused on the examination of authentic leadership in nurse executives in magnet and non-magnet hospitals. Next slide. Our next slide. We have no disclosure statements. There is no conflict of interest for anyone with the ability to control content for this activity. And with our next slide, this course has been approved by the California Board of Registered Nursing, CE 17639, for a maximum of 1 nursing contact hours. The licensee must retain this document for 4 years after the course concludes. All participants will receive their certificates of attendance with CEs after completion of the webinar survey. To obtain the survey, please visit www.nursingleadershipscience.org survey to complete our survey and get your CEs. And without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Rasso, who will begin our webinar series.
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. All 3 of us are listed in alphabetical order. We'll actually be speaking in the opposite of that, about authentic nurse leadership practice. So our objectives for today are really to compare the different relational styles. Authentic is one of the relational styles. Look at outcomes that are out there and really start a dialogue on nursing leadership development and creating theories of nursing leadership. So here we go. Here is the relational model. And on the side is 4 of the ones that you see the most: transformational, authentic, servant, human-centered. I'll speak a little bit about each one of these in this opening part of the session. The colorful model on the side is Comivas and his colleagues from 1998, but actually you could see relational leadership appearing in the literature, not nursing literature, but in management literature back in the 50s. Looking at leader influence and social exchange. And that concept of social exchange is still looked at by our management colleagues. So what Comivas did was put these 5 attributes together and with process surrounding purpose. So clear communication and purpose. Ethics, of course, is ethical behavior. Inclusivity is listening and all those relational skills. Empowering, of course, is focusing on building people's strengths and growth and development. And you can see how this all really relates to nursing values as well. And the process piece means focusing on how, not so much on positional power. Now, for transformational leadership, there's 2 models that are out there. Well, there's probably more, but these are the 2 that are most popular. And the first is the 4 I's, and that is measured by the MLQ. So when you look at transformational leadership research studies, you'll see that MLQ used, and that's this model. The first one, the 4 I's: individualized consideration, which is respect, mentoring, etc., where the person feels valued; intellectual stimulation, innovation; inspirational motivation, and that's where that charismatic quality of the transformational leader comes in. And then the last I is idealized influence, which is where the role modeling piece comes in, and an element of charisma as well. Now, Kouzes and Posner back in, well, maybe not that long, well, 2007, came up with this model, which is measured by the LPI, and I see a lot in nursing research studies on leadership. And there's 5 practices here, and I've tried to line them up with how they line up with the original model by Bass. And in the first box, which is where everybody is respected and the people piece, is not only collaboration and development, but he adds encourage the heart. And I just want to put a pin in that because the heart makes me think of caring, and you're going to see later how caring comes into nursing versions of these models. So then we have challenge the process, again, innovation; inspiring a vision, again, communication and vision; and modeling the way, role modeling. So these relate to each other's, adding this encourage the heart piece. So then we have authentic leadership, and the original, I shouldn't say original, but it first started appearing in the early 2000s. 2004, Aviolo and all his colleagues, Volumba, etc., who you may all be familiar with, came up with this model, which is really based on high moral character and leading with your values and with integrity. So the 4 attributes, we have the big blue bar on the bottom, that's self-awareness, that's reflection, that's feedback, Authentic behavior is the internalized moral perspective piece, which is leading with your values. Balanced processing means listening, taking input, being open. Relational transparency, that means where that is really the heavy duty relational piece where trust is really developed. And again, that's open, honest communication. So that's the authentic leadership model that is measured by the ALQ. Then 2 years ago, Marie Mulligan, Giordano Mulligan, and Eckhart published their authentic nurse leadership model. And what she did, and this was her dissertation, was take authentic leadership, combine it with the concepts of caring, and came up with her model of authentic nurse leadership, which is modeled in 3 domains: personal integrity, which takes the moral courage and the self-awareness piece is in that domain; transparency, which is the relational piece and the shared decision-making. This is a little more nursing language, shared decision-making. And then the 3rd domain is altruism, and the attribute is caring. So we see caring introduced into this leadership model. And then it was related to nurse engagement and was very positively correlated. So that's a new nursing leadership model. So next we have servant leadership. And servant leadership, I have 3 models here. There might be more, but the first, I believe, is Spears in '98, and his model was 10 characteristics. Then Laub comes along in '99 and kind of simplifies that into 6 behaviors, which don't exactly line up, but I tried to line them up for purposes of us trying to put these all in context today. And then more recently in 2017 is Kutzer, I'm not sure I'm saying that name right, who defines it as 8 characteristics, which line up somewhere with the other 2. And you see a lot of the same words that we've already talked about: authenticity, listening, altruism, courage, integrity. So you see a lot of these relational models are starting to really line up. And then I made my own little Venn diagram of these 3. Tried to figure out what's different, what's similar, and they do feel more alike than different. So transformational has that charismatic piece that's often mentioned, and the vision, which you don't see in the others. Authentic is truly focused on values driven and the moral courage piece. Servant is very focused on the people first piece. But what all of them share is relational competencies, all the workforce outcomes like job satisfaction and engagement and turnover, a healthy work environment, which Joyce is going to talk about shortly. We did some research on that. Authenticity is shared by servant, and authentic self-awareness is shared by those 2 as well. Caring, I really should move that up, because in the Kuzer and Posner practices, encourage the heart is in there, and that just says caring to me. So I think actually caring might be for all 3. So is this when we launch a poll? Yes, it is. So will Robert launch our poll? Okay, put on your thinking caps. What do you think about having a specific nursing conceptualization of leadership? Is that important? And are any of these 3 speak to you about why it's important? All right, let's see what you thought. All of the above is the predominant. Now, I mean, there's no right and wrong here, but if I had to pick, I would pick all of the above in terms of advancing the science, in terms of leader development, which we haven't even talked about and is wide open for needing work. And of course, the bottom line is all about patient and family outcomes. And that is another area that needs a lot of work in terms of leadership research. All right, I am going to move on to my last two slides. So I did not want to eliminate human-centered leadership from our discussion. This webinar was presented by Kay Kennedy and Lou, I can't see the name, Lucy Leclerc and Susan a few months ago on ALSN. That is an image of the book, which is not out yet, but will be in a few months. And this is I believe it falls into the relational bucket. And as you can see, it's a little more complicated, and that's the point. It is based on complexity science. It is not linear. The leader is in the middle with a heart, I might add. Caring is in this model as well. And there's three roles for the leader: the awakener, which is about people and development; the upholder, which is where the caring and humanity comes in; and the connector, which is where community and collaboration comes in. So this is a new model for nursing leadership, and I expect we'll be hearing a lot more about this. So my last slide is about what the evidence says. And in the box on, at least it's my left, there was a study by Anderson looking at servant leadership and transformational leadership, concluding there was not construct clarity. The first box on the right is a study by Banks and friends. David really wanted me to read over this one. And what was found here was construct or empirical redundancy between authentic leadership and transformational leadership, but with a difference. Transformational leadership was more dominant at the unit level for individual outcomes like job satisfaction and satisfaction with the leader, but authentic leadership was dominant over organizational level outcomes like performance. And then the last box is another study, recent, Malloy, and this was transformational and authentic, again, finding convergent validity. So I think we have some work to do on leadership theories. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Dr. Joyce Fitzpatrick.
So thank you very much, Roseanne. And I would just underline the comment that Roseanne has made about how we need to do more development of our conceptual and theoretical understandings of leadership, specifically in nursing. So we're at a very early stage, but I want to talk about some of the research that we've done. And this research is reflected in these two publications in JONA, under the leadership, of course, for first for the doctoral education work of Dr. Raso, and then a subsequent study. So what we were really interested in is the relationship between authentic nurse leadership as measured by the ANLQ, the Authentic Nurse Leadership Questionnaire, and healthy work environments as measured by the healthy work environment structural assessment that was proposed by AACN. So we first of all wanted to know about nurses' perception of authentic nurse leadership of their manager or their supervisor. And then, of course, their perception of their work environment, and importantly, the relationship between these two key variables. So in fact, the first study was done prior to the pandemic, and the second study was done at the height of the pandemic. Data were collected last year. Both studies were cross-sectional, descriptive, correlational studies. In the first study, there were 254 nurses, and the data were collected at the Magnet Conference. In the second study, through the network of the DAISY Foundation, we were able to access 5,088 nurses and nurse leaders using snowball sampling from a national database. We used the same instruments in both studies, as I've already mentioned, the Authentic Nurse Leadership Questionnaire developed by Mulligan and Eckert, and based on the Authentic Nurse Leadership Model, and the Critical Elements of a Healthy Work Environment Survey, which was developed by AACN. And then in the second study, we asked our participants the extent to which the pandemic had impacted their clinical practice. And we asked them to rate that on a scale of 0 to 10. So that was a particularly interesting aspect of the second study. What we found was that nurses' perception of authentic nurse leadership was present in both studies. So you see in study 1, 3.06, not all that different in study 2. And so we had a presence of authentic nurse leadership, meaning that the nurses who participated saw that their immediate supervisor was an authentic nurse leader. We did find that it was higher during the pandemic and even higher for managers and directors compared to clinical nurses. And so a question that we have deliberated is, why was it higher during the pandemic? And why was it higher for managers and directors compared to clinical nurses? So we would love to discuss that with you. Next slide, please. So we also found that nurses' perceptions of a healthy work environment were present in both studies, but barely. And when we pulled apart the clinical nurses and the managers and directors and looked at those two groups separately, we found that the clinical nurses really had lower scores during the pandemic. So there were a couple of dimensions that led to the fact that clinical nurses did not perceive that their work environment was healthy because the cutoff was 3.0 for a healthy work environment. So you can see the 2.97 was under the cutoff for a healthy work environment. And again, we have more details that we've discussed in the second article related to our findings. The managers and the directors, however, had perceptions of a healthy work environment even during the pandemic with the score of 3.37. So the scale is from 0 to 4. So you see that managers and directors' perception of the healthy work environment was high. Next slide, please. Our Pearson correlations in both studies were positively related at the level of 0.01. In the first study, the Pearson correlation was 0.59. And in the second study, it was even higher at 0.625. But of course, not significantly different from study 1. But those are high correlations that really support the positive relationship between authentic nurse leadership and healthy work environment. So we found that there is evidence for concluding that leadership, in particular, authentic nurse leadership, is important in relation to perceptions of a healthy work environment. So our next poll question for you: what does the evidence show regarding the relationship between nurse leadership and healthy work environment? And we ask you to choose the best answer here. So at least we made our point that there is a significant positive relationship between perceptions of authentic nurse leadership and healthy work environment. And obviously that was significant in both of our studies as we've described them. So we believe there is evidence to support that positive relationship. So thank you for concurring with us. So there is literature relating authentic leadership. Now, this is distinguished from authentic nurse leadership, but it's important that we know the literature. And Wong did a scoping review of the studies that had been done on authentic leadership from 2017 to 2019. And there were 27 studies. And what was known from that review is that authentic leadership is positively related to job satisfaction, positive work attitudes and behavior, and empowerment, and then negatively related to turnover. We also reviewed the work of Aliani in 2018, which was a systematic review of 43 outcomes related to authentic leadership. And again, in this review, there was a positive relationship to some of the same variables: work satisfaction, work environment, health and well-being, job satisfaction, and there was one study of patient outcomes, and that was specifically related to falls in patients. So you see, with only one study, we have a lot of work to do to move forward and link our research to patient outcomes. In this systematic review, 23 mediating variables were included. Variables such as incivility and structural empowerment, variables that are often present in the nursing research literature. So what we know, linking authentic leadership. Now again, authentic leadership as measured by the authentic leadership questionnaires, not specifically the ANLQ. We do know from multiple industries, there is increased employee engagement, improved outcomes, healthier work environments, improved retention, stronger interdisciplinary teams, and a positive focus on psychological capital.
I think we're switching to David now.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Bailey.
Sure. Thank you all so much. And in that first study on the last slide that Dr. Fitzpatrick mentioned by Hurst, and that is a misspelling that we included there, so I'll correct that and we'll put that in. But that is the only study that we can find where there has been more than one level examined. Because usually it's just the staff nurse or the front line to their immediate manager. But out of all of the literature in my own doctoral work, that is the only study, and believe it or not, this is not in healthcare. It is a Taiwanese study that was done in a customs at the country level, the national level in Taiwan. But that's the only study that we could detect that really are looking at what are the two levels above the front line. Are they making a difference so that it cascades down to look at, is there really creating a difference? So you can go to the next slide, Roseanne, thank you. But we can tell that the studies do exist to really support authentic leadership inside and outside of nursing. Wong and some of our colleagues from Canada have done a lot more work over the last several decades than has really been done in the US, but with Dr. Fitzpatrick's and Dr. Razzo's work, and there's some other emerging work now, there is more being done in the nursing world in the United States. But we really do have a broad opportunity here because it's all about relationship proficiency. Without that, you can tell that really other things don't work. And we hope that the evidence that you've seen today portrays that. But why I placed this slide in here about the ALSN AONL Foundation Advisory Committee, we just announced that a few weeks ago between the two professional organizations, because we're hopeful that we, in a partnership, can further pursue work like this that we're talking about with authentic leadership. And those groups are going to be led by Heather Nelson Brantley and Lindell Joseph, and we are really, really excited about that partnership. But when you go and look at some of the work and from the Delphi study that was done, there's two big themes that are coming out, and probably in some of these areas where we'll be focusing. One of them is about well-being and resiliency, and the other one is really looking at developing and managing population health, and that goes right to our next slide. So from the Future of Nursing 2020 to 2030 report that is not in publishable format yet, but you certainly can get it online, look at that first item, expanding leadership education and competencies, because we are in a new day. I mean, with my CNO colleagues, Roseanne and I have multiple conversations, about things going on, and we are on, each side of the country, but, many of our challenges are the same. And I'm sure many of you all are facing very similar challenges. When 25% of our experienced workforce is going to retire in the decade that we are currently in, that's sort of overwhelming. So how will we move ourselves through that? And it's going to take some new leadership competencies to do that. Honestly, just as I mentioned on the last slide about healthy work, we really do have to look. Our staff are probably at the most, probably the largest state now of not feeling supported, not feeling like they have everything they need, in light of the pandemic. I mean, Colleen and I met with a group yesterday on our campus, and they don't feel supported when they have tons of support, but it's because they are on the front lines and experiencing so many other challenges. And then also the other item here out of the report, advocating for health, equity, diversity, inclusion. Who better to do that than nursing? So, taking that broader umbrella of the report and then looking at how we can use authentic leadership to really move some of these agendas forward. Because if you don't have that relationship, it's not going to work. Roseanne, you can move to the next slide, please. And here, further in the report, you can look at, with nurses leading, facilitating the changes, but they have to be able to take care of themselves first. And if you go back to those earlier slides that Roseanne talked about, that self-awareness, you've got to make sure you're taking care of yourself before you can do that to others. Some of us, that is a journey in progress, but really you have to make sure that you're doing that for yourself before you really can do it for others, before you can really make big changes or lead in healthcare, really outside of healthcare. Because I think we have a huge opportunity here to really look at, in the lens of authentic leadership and authentic nurse leadership, how can we advance the agenda for leadership competencies, skills, education, and just the overall practice of nursing leadership. You can go to the next slide, Roseanne. So we still have work to do. There are not studies that have occurred in nursing that look at it from a hierarchical perspective. Only in the customs department or the customs realm have they done this. So, I'd personally love to see a study where, the staff nurses rank their managers, the managers rank their directors, the directors rank their CNO or whatever that title may be. But how would we look at that, and really does it cascade down? Because ideally you would hope it does, and that's what was found in the customs study. But we need to look and see, is this really working elsewhere? And then really taking what Joyce and Roseanne have been talking about, differentiating authentic nurse leadership, and really linking that to engagement and patient outcomes. Some studies are indicating there is, and Joyce talked about the one with Falls. And in some of the other studies, it does feel that if a nurse is in a healthy work environment, they feel trusted, they feel supported, they feel like they give better care. And so we have to just look at that whole equation. And then really, how do we further distinguish authentic nurse leadership from some of the other positive and relational leadership styles? Roseanne, you can go to the next slide. So we had planned to, at this point in the slide deck, and when we knew we were doing the webinar, we had planned to invite you to a meeting or a drop-in at the conference. Well, because our world has transitioned a little bit, we're going to talk about that in a second. If anyone wants to stay after the webinar today, Joyce, Roseanne, and I are going to stick around for a short time, because we're hoping that some of you may consider joining us to do some further research, because we recognize that I think Joyce used the word a while back with us, we are ripe. We are ripe for really doing additional work in this field to really look at how do we distinguish ourselves as nurse leaders, and how can we make a difference for the patients and the teams that take care of those patients for us. So that portion of the conference will not be under the CEU, it will not be recorded, but it's just for open dialogue for us. If anybody wants to stay, you're welcome to do that. But at this point, you can go to the next slide, Roseanne. We want to open it up for questions and answers. I see a few questions that have been dropped in, but I know that Nancy is going to help us with this. So Nancy, please open up the questions and answer, or questions for us, and Joyce and Roseanne will work on this for you.
Let me go back. Let's see. There was one question about the AACN has really, and I'm not sure if they were talking about AACN as Academy of Colleges of Nurses or AACN as Critical Care Organization that exhorted transformational or authentic leadership, transformational leadership. And did they think that this would change in the near future to include more authentic leadership styles?
I did see that question related to Magnet. In terms of AACN, we use the critical care nurse model, and one of the essential standards is authentic leadership. That's actually what got us interested in this whole correlation in the first place, was to develop that empirically. From a Magnet point of view, Magnet does have a whole section on transformational leadership. And in the discussion section of our first paper, Joyce and I did put that out there. Maybe Magnet might want to consider, Magnet is not defined as a person right now, but might want to consider elements of authentic leadership within that domain as well.
What do you think? You'd be better? Go ahead.
If I might add to that comment by Roseanne, perhaps the better recommendation to the Magnet Commission is to include relationship-based leadership models as the framework for Magnet, rather than selecting any one of the many relationship-based leadership models. Because as Roseanne pointed out in the earlier conceptual slides, there's a great deal of overlap among the various relationship-based models. And that, that's a whole area for research, of course, is to clarify the redundancy in these various relationship-based models, and to make sure that we understand both the overlap and possibly the precision that can be identified in the conceptualization. And specifically, is there a difference in nursing science compared to science in other disciplines?
I think that's a good point, that it really is the whole body of work on relationship-based leadership styles that might be a broader term to include in the Magnet model, so that it doesn't really focus on one or the other. Since they were probably at the time they were developing it, that was the primary leadership model we were all looking at. So the other question that was brought up was, why do we need a specific leadership model for nurses? Could it not just be authentic leadership in any setting?
Well, isn't that a loaded question?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's particularly relevant to this organization, which is the Association for Leadership Science in Nursing. And, there's an early paper in the theoretical literature back in the 1970s when we were struggling with the science of nursing. And, is it science applied to nursing, or is it nursing science, or is it science that is developed by scientists in any discipline? And is there a uniqueness in nursing? So I think that debate is an ongoing debate that we have in our discipline that is not unique to nursing. Other disciplines have the same debate. But if we have a discipline, then we have to have science that is unique to that discipline.
Yeah, I agree. We need to know how it applies to our discipline, even if we're using the tenets of that same theory. Good point. What do you foresee? A question from, I think it was Colleen, said in future studies that would correlate staff's perception of their leadership being authentic to their unit or department's patient outcomes and staff outcomes.
Well, that's really missing in the literature, is patient outcomes. And that's really what it's all about. Now, you could make a leap. We definitely have a lot of literature on workforce outcomes in terms of satisfaction and engagement and all of that. You could then make the leap because there are studies that connect engagement with outcomes. So you could leapfrog that out. But directly leadership to patient outcomes, there, at least from what I've found, or I should say not found, I think there's a dearth of literature there.
Yeah, and I'm happy to add to that. I also sort of envision a study being done where you look at the outcomes through NDNQI or some other national, benchmarking database, and really look at, like nurse satisfaction, patient satisfaction, then do the leadership side of the authentic leadership work, and really looking at all that and see how the overlays and the correlations work. So I think we absolutely have a lot of work to still do in this area.
I agree. And my bias is looking at things at the unit level, which we don't do a lot of because it's so inherently difficult to get enough units to participate. But because you can mask a lot when you look at everything at an organization level. Have you seen any work done at unit level with authentic leadership to see how it varies between units? Or
I haven't seen a thing like that. David, you've done a lot of research, have you?
There are a couple studies out there. There's one by Wu and Han. I don't have the database, but they did one and they really looked across disciplines like the therapies, nursing, pharmacy, and they were really looking at the leader practicing authentic leadership to see if the group felt that dynamic. And that is the only study that I can find with, sort of that overall work. But that's like the only ones. I think, I agree, Nancy, we have a lot of work to still do in that area and look at it from an interdisciplinary perspective, because that's the only one that I saw.
Yeah, unit level gets difficult because the ends are so small, especially for outcomes, especially if you're looking at events like falls and infections.
Yeah, you almost have to have a national database for that to do
Yeah.
it through NDQI.
Right, and then we get away, well, I don't know. I'm sure there's a way to do it.
Yeah, we struggle with that.
Yeah, we also know that there is very little research on the implementation of leadership-based development interventions for nurses and patient outcomes. So what we do know is that leadership development programs lead to positive outcomes for the nurses, but we need to take the next step to link that to patient outcomes.
I have thank you. I have a quick question. I'm thinking as you're speaking, how does the literature that's out there that's describing what the new nurses and millenniums want from their leaders compared to the authentic nursing leadership models and the work that you're doing on relationship-based leadership styles of leading, you know? I'm guessing there's lots of congruency, but what are you seeing? What are you actually seeing in print?
I could tell you that with the studies that we did, when we did the background variables, and age was one of them, there wasn't a shred of a difference, whether it be work environment or leadership, or there was not a shred of difference in age groups or tenure or any of those background demographics. So it just made me think, and of course I'm talking about 2 studies here, but it made me think that leadership is leadership. And when you're good at relational competencies and all of the things we just talked about in terms of inclusion, empowerment, listening, voice, values driven, that speaks millennial to me, you know, without, but I haven't seen any studies to answer your exact question. I don't know, Joyce or David?
And Laura, there were a few studies and a lot of the work out of Canada by Wong and Lassinger, and you know, both of them certainly have been members of ALSN. They did a lot of work with new graduates, and they really found a lot of correlations between an individual who practiced, a leader who practiced at the authentic leadership, you know, realm or sort of domain, and then the outcomes of that group. They looked at retention, staff satisfaction, trust. So there is work out there, but you know, some of those are probably about 13 or 14 years old now. And I'm not seeing anything more recent. But there were significant studies that Wong et al. Were involved in that looked at. I mean, some of those were Canada. There were some also. They also looked into the U.S. and the findings were pretty similar.
Now we pretty well, I think, have decided that it's important that we have these relational, you know, strong relationship-based leadership styles. Is there anything out there on how you teach that to somebody? How do you change someone who doesn't inherently have some of those characteristics to become that way?
Another loaded question.
Yeah.
I think leadership development is definitely a topic that needs a lot of work within our discipline for sure. I know Eloise Cathcart is in this participant list, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but I've been working with her with the NYU Nurse Admin Master's Program, and we have been talking how the embedded experiential learning is really a key part besides theoretical work and papers in school and all of that. So
I would say 2 things if I could, Roseanne. I was trying to figure out how to get into this conversation without jumping in. It's always such a challenge on Zoom. I am praying that we are back in the classroom in September. But my own research, I've done a lot of work with expert nurse managers in looking at how they understand, you know, a lot of practice articulation work with narrative and expert nurse managers. And one of the central findings of that work is that you can't separate the nurse leader from the nurse, that nurse leaders look at dilemmas, at leadership dilemmas, at strategies from the perspective of being a nurse. And that was one of the questions I think that someone answered or asked earlier about why do we as nurses need our own model of leadership? And I would answer that. I've been trying to think about how to say this cogently, but I would answer that by saying that there's such a close connection between being a nurse and how nurse leaders understand their own leadership practice that it's very difficult to pull it apart. And what Roseanne is talking about is every time Roseanne has one of the students in our nursing administration program, they come away from their preceptorship with her totally awed and amazed at all that they have learned. So we have been trying to figure out what goes on between what happens in the classroom and what happens in their clinical practicum and try to begin to describe that. And we know from Benner's work and others that you have to talk about authenticity or authentic leadership in the situation because it's the context that allows those character virtues of leadership to emerge, that when you talk about them decontextually, you really can't do it. So I can say in the classroom, I can go over all the literature, I can go over all the evidence and talk about authentic leadership and put the student in the right ballpark. But until the student sees it in practice, they can't really know it, and therefore they really can't know how to do it. So this is what we're working on now with one of our mutual students.
That's a great segue for us, unfortunately, to start the next conversation right after this webinar. We need a few more minutes to turn the slides back to Colleen to close the webinar, and I hope several of you will stay, as I am going to continue this conversation with Roseanne and Joyce and David. This is really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. So many great minds in one small virtual room here. And I think the future is our oyster. So I'm very excited to hear where things go. There's a lot of great work to come. I have the privilege of announcing that we are now going to be moving from in-person to our virtual conference this year for ALSN. As many of you are experiencing, our COVID Delta variant numbers are increasing across the country, and in an effort to ensure that we have create a safe environment that really enhances our opportunities for learning, collaborating, and growing. The decision was made to move our conference that is scheduled on October 16th through 18th to a virtual conference. Our keynote speakers are preparing for their presentations, and we will still continue to have breakout sessions and poster sessions as originally planned. If any of you were participants during our last virtual conference, I thought it was quite engaging. We had musicians playing live music, we had chair yoga, there's all kinds of things that we're doing to keep you moving throughout even in a virtual setting. So please join us. We have amazing speakers as well as some great posters and abstracts to review. And then for our future webinars, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Oh, sorry, forgot about the pre-conference workshop. I got so excited about those. I've tried to sign up for both of them. But we have two great workshops going on. We have our evidence-based practice workshop that will be led by Lynn Gallagher Ford and Penny Gorish. We will be discussing how to identify those connections between evidence-based practice and achieving high reliability and meeting that quadruple aim, much to that healthy work environment that was discussed a little bit earlier. So if you haven't had an opportunity to go through this, I highly recommend it. If you're working in any kind of clinical setting, it's amazing, as well as to help develop your clinicians for having an evidence-based practice approach, as well as in the setting for the university. And then we also have our editors workshop that will be led by Leslie H. Nickel, who is our professional editorial services editor-in-chief. She's computers, informatics, nursing editor, nurse, author, and editor. So we have some opportunities to learn the 5 steps in manuscript success, describe the 2 strategies that authors can use to enhance our manuscript acceptance, and identify 1 ethical issue relating to authorship. So both of them are amazing opportunities. To me, it was a really hard choice on which one to pick, but I hope you will take some time to join one of the pre-conference workshops. And now we have our upcoming webinars, and the next one will be on September 15th at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that will be based on From the Edge of Chaos to Growth, Strategies to Adapt Beyond the Pandemic, which is hugely needed at this time. And this will be presented by Dr. Holly Wai. And then our next, I think we have one more after that. Yep, we have one more on November 16th from 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And that will be If It Were You, If It Were Your Family, What Would You Want? A Balanced and Informed Approach to Reinstating Family Presence. And this one will be presented by Dr. Sarah Guastello, Christine Pabico, and Lonette Wolford. Sorry if I've butchered any names there, but they're both great seminars, and I think you'll have an opportunity to learn and also share some of the information you get from them. So thank you all so much for your attention and participation in today's webinar.